Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. It's good to have you with us today. I want to jump in and talk about a recent occurrence here during the Canadian election campaign. As we do this podcast, it was the evening before, last evening, that Pierre Poilievre had a rally in Edmonton, Alberta, which is Tory country, of course, and has been for quite some time. The special guest of that was former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Poilievre's old boss. So you can imagine the tone, you can imagine the rhetoric that was going on there. But some of the things that were mentioned, especially by Harper, I just have to comment on here because I know that we're going to get political spin in every one of these election campaigns, and that's expected, and you have to take everything you say with a grain of salt or everything that you hear with a grain of salt. But some of the stuff that Harper mentioned and Poilievre has mentioned over the last couple of days, I just think is over the top. As you might expect, one of the themes in Harper's 10-minute address at his introduction to Poilievre at this rally was about Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre. And as Harper said, he says, I have the distinction of actually I hired both of these guys. Well, yes and no. I mean, he did hire Mark Carney to be the governor of the Bank of Canada. He hired him, okay? Nobody pressured him. Nobody said this has got to be the guy. This was Stephen Harper's decision. And this is why I find it so interesting that now what they're trying to do is basically downplay any contribution, any positive impact that Carney had on the Canadian economy and on our political scene and our economic scene during his time as Bank of Canada governor, which I think is substantial, and the record indicates was a substantial contribution. So for Harper to now say, oh, no, it was no big deal, is hypocritical and basically baseless, because there doesn't seem to be any record of that. A couple of facts to put there. First of all, as I just mentioned, it was Stephen Harper who hired Mark Carney to be the Bank of Canada governor. It was Stephen Harper who praised him in the House of Commons when Carney stepped down. It's all there on YouTube, by the way. You can check it out and watch it if you so desire. He was effusive in his praise for the great work and the contributions that Carney had made. So, that, Stephen, you can't change the record. You can't change history to suit your own purposes, okay? You lugged the guy then. You had a great deal of admiration for his work and his respect. Now he's a liberal, and you got to hate him, so now you're trying to do it. It doesn't wash, okay? You can't change history to try to suit your purposes. And that's the thing I find frustrating about this whole thing. As a matter of fact, we also found out that Harper, after Carney's term as Bank of Canada governor, recommended Carney for the Order of Canada. And in fact, he went and we did receive that recognition. And you've heard the story that Harper doesn't seem to want to talk about now, but there seems to be a strong body of evidence that during the rough times after Harper and his finance minister, Jim Flaherty, had a falling out, Harper asked Carney to come back and be his finance minister. Now, he doesn't want to talk about that, but there seems to be some evidence that happens. So don't give me this crap all of a sudden that this guy was not a contributor. He was. They just don't want to admit it now because he's running for the other side. He basically last night tried to say that, look, at any recovery that we did and the rapidity of the recovery that we had after the recession was due not to Mark Carney, but to Jim Flaherty, who was his finance minister. I talked to Jim Flaherty a number of times when he was in office, both as a federal finance minister and even before that as a provincial finance minister here in Ontario. He's a nice guy, and I quite enjoyed his company. We talked about a number of other things, but the record indicates he wasn't a very good finance minister. And just if you want to look specifically at his time in federal politics, because he jumped from provincial to the federal scene when Harper became prime minister, we had 11 years of surplus governments under the Chrétien/Paul Martin governments. Within 1 year, we were back in deficit, and we ran 9 years of deficit governments. I tend to forget about this because of what happened with COVID and everything, but when Harper left office in 2015, we had the largest national debt in our history, which, again, as I've said in past podcasts, seems to run contrary to what people think that, conservatives are the money managers. No, they're not. They spent more money, and you got to ask yourself to what end, than ever before. They ran up the national debt. We had 10 years of deficit governments. That's not good money management. From a guy who was supposed to be an expert in economics. That's what Harper studied in university. Never actually had a job as an economist, but you figured, okay, he's got the bona fides. Well, no, he doesn't. And no, he didn't at that time. So for them to simply just try to dismiss what Carney had done and what he contributed and try to take the credit for that themselves. I can still remember a conversation I had with Flaherty when he was the finance minister on the eve of that recession back in 08, 09, where he indicated that he and the prime minister felt that this was going to be no big deal. Yeah, things were looking pretty grim down in the States right now with defaulted mortgages, etc. But we're going to be okay. It's not going to have much of an impact on Canada. Well, just a couple of months after that, boom, we saw what happened. And they weren't prepared for it. And they had to do some damage control in that. So let's not try to candy coat just how bad things were then and how badly managed our economic situation was. Carney was a guy who did a great job. And which is why the Conservative government in the UK basically chased him to take the job at the Bank of England shortly after that, because they saw the kind of job that he did here in Canada. So let's not dismiss that. If you don't hate Carney for a number of reasons, that's one thing. But don't dismiss his contributions and don't dismiss the guy's expertise. It's there, okay? That's one thing. And of course, they're trying to tie Carney to the Trudeau policies and simply saying, well, everything that's wrong with Canada is because of Justin Trudeau, and Carney was there to support each and every one of those. Well, that's not true. Carney was not a part of the Trudeau administration. He did consult, we're told, in the latter couple of years, which basically means, hey, you can call me if you want some advice. But he wasn't sitting at the cabinet table. He wasn't a key part of policy making with the Trudeau government. But they want to tie that together, which is an interesting part of it that I want to spend a few minutes talking about here. Because what Harper has done and what he did last night and what Poilievre has been doing during this campaign is basically very much along the lines of what extreme right-wing governments or wannabe governments are doing these days. And it's all the brainchild of a gentleman by the name of Arthur Finkelstein, who is an American right-wing pollster that's been around for quite some time. He's considered by many to be, well, should we say, the father of extreme right-wing political theories and politicking. And basically the theme that Finkelstein has developed that other governments and other political leaders, including Donald Trump, by the way, have used and used effectively, sadly, is basically you don't need to develop any policies. You don't have to have any hard and fast answers to what needs to be done to a country. All you need to do is, well, two things. First of all, find out what people are pissed off about. Is it the economy? Is it inflation? Is it housing? Is it immigration? Is it those people of different colors that are taking our jobs? You find what that is. Those are the hot points. And you basically turn around, which is part two, blame the government or blame your enemy, blame the other opposition government for all the problems. Immigration is their fault. Housing is their fault. Inflation is their fault. And it's just this guy. Even though, for instance, over the last number of years, we've had a global economic crisis. It wasn't just in Canada. But Poilievre wants to paint that, oh, it's only here and it's only Justin Trudeau that caused it. Everything that's wrong with the world, everything that's wrong with your life was caused by Justin Trudeau. And when people are angry, they don't think logically. They're angry and they're looking for a place to try to channel that anger, and they fall into that gap. And Harper used that to get elected, of course, in the first place back in 06. And certainly he's followed through, and his protege, Poilievre, seems to be doing the same sort of thing. And it's all because of this Finkelstein attitude, which, by the way, Finkelstein is no stranger to Stephen Harper. He had been around Canada. He'd been with the National Citizens Coalition, worked for them. He's an American, but he came up here and worked for the National Citizens Coalition, which, by the way, Harper was a member of before he got into politics. We're told that he helped Harper actually get elected as an MP back in the early 1990s. And that was using those sorts of tactics, of course. And subsequently, of course, Harper learned at his knee about how to actually run political campaigns. And Poilievre, of course, has taken the lead to try to do the same sort of thing. Harper these days, let's bring you up to speed on that for those who maybe don't follow the Canadian political scene or the international political scene to the extent that some people do, like political geeks like myself and some of my colleagues. Harper is the head of an organization called the International Democracy Union. I always find it interesting that people that seem to hold extreme views on things love to use words like democracy and fairness in the title of their organizations, when in fact the way those organizations are actually manipulating people is quite the opposite of democracy, etc. His organization, the International Democracy Union, by the way, one of their shining stars is Viktor Orbán, who is the Hungarian prime minister, who considers Stephen Harper, quote, a great ally in the work that Orbán is doing in Hungary, which, by the way, is basically eroding all of the democratic guardrails in Hungary, basically changing the way elections are being run, controlling the appointment of judges, and basically turning this into almost the same sort of government that we see with Putin, the same sort of government we see with Kim Jong-il. These are what the extreme right-wing politicians and oligarchs that try to gain office are doing on a regular basis. And Harper's the guy that runs the organization that promotes this sort of activity. That's where this guy's head is at and has been for quite some time. So let's keep that in mind. Another one of Harper's good buddies, of course, is Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And we already know, of course, about their association. And we also know from CSIS and other intelligence agencies here that the Indian government has tried successfully to infiltrate and to influence Canadian politics. We know that there's hard evidence right now that the Indian government supported Pierre Poilievre and tried to influence the conservative leadership race. Now we're finding out that, of course, the Indian government is involved still in disinformation campaigns here in Canadian politics. The fact that Modi and Harper are buddies, the fact that Poilievre is a protege of Harper's, you got to wonder just where their mindset is. So, are we being inundated and being influenced by the, well, first of all, we know the Indian government because that proof is there. We also know as of this week that the Chinese government is doing a number of misinformation campaigns as well. So we've got to be cognizant of just who the players are here and what they're trying to do and how they're influencing us. And maybe not you and me, but people around us that are going to be influenced by this. When you're angry and you're pissed off at something, it's pretty easy to take, yeah, that's right, it's that person's fault, and direct their anger toward them. Logic doesn't seem to play a part in an awful lot of that, and they count on that. They bank on the fact that most Canadians or Americans, wherever they're going to try to infiltrate the system, are going to feel the same way. This game plan that we just talked about make people angry and then channel their anger towards the opposition, it's the same game plan, of course, that Donald Trump has used very effectively. And you see what happened. Once again, even though there had been a first Trump campaign, we saw in the States, we saw the economy go to hell in a handcart. We saw the unrest that was caused, the social unrest, the racial unrest that was going on. We acknowledged the fact that the rules were broken. People went to jail because of the way that they tried to manipulate the system. Yet he gets reelected. Why? Because they went back to this game plan. People are angry, and it's all their fault. It's all Joe Biden's fault, or it's all Justin Trudeau's fault. And that's the short answer. In other words, hey, I don't have to think because this guy's telling me where I should be angry. We've got to be better than that with our political system. And the fact that these guys have been around doing as much as they have, and the influence that they're having, I think indicates that we've got a real concern and a real problem here. The extreme right politics and the extreme politicians that are trying to gain power, not just here in Canada, but in the United States, where it's worked effectively, in Hungary with Orbán, in Germany, in France. We've seen these hard right movements. We've seen some of those politicians come over here. And who do they gravitate to? Members of the Harper government, members of the opposition. They've been photographed with some of these extremists. Poilievre, of course, with his support for the trucker convoy. Those are the same sorts of people. And that's the ilk and that's the mindset of those people. So watch what you wish for here, all right? Whether, you've decided to vote conservative or liberal, whatever the case might be, understand that there are people actively trying to manipulate this process with misinformation and half facts. And we don't spend as much time as we probably should researching what we're going to be doing and to whom we're going to be offering our support. And it's easy to fall prey to this sort of stuff. But know the players and don't just listen to the rhetoric. To hear Stephen Harper tell it in Edmonton the other night, Poilievre is God's gift to politics. He saw him rise as a young backbencher and became a cabinet minister. Well, he became a cabinet minister in the later years of Harper's government after a number of others had fallen out of favor. And, he talked about Poilievre's record. We talked about a housing crisis in this country. Harper didn't mention the fact that during his reign, and even while Poilievre was the Minister of Housing, the government sold off tons and dried up subsidies for government housing. They were part of the problem, not part of the solution. And that was Poilievre, and that was Harper. It was on their watch that's how, so it didn't start there, but they sure made a bad situation worse by what they did. But they don't want you to know about that. That's one of the things they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the fact that here's Pierre Poilievre who says he's out to try to mend this country because it's broken. This is the same guy that they basically said that Aboriginal people had to learn how to appreciate a good, hard day's work as opposed to having their hand out looking for government money. We're told that he had ended up on the carpet in Harper's office after that statement. That's the sort of people that we're dealing with. And you can't just gloss over that and pretend it never happened. It did. And that is, as much as anything else, has to be factored into who these people are and what they're all about. What they say to get elected is not often what they're going to do once they get elected. Donald Trump's a great example of that. We've seen so many other examples of that. And it goes back to something I've been talking about for years on this podcast, on the radio show before that. All right, when it comes to elected officials or people that want your vote and want to gain power in this country, don't just listen to what they say. Watch what they do, because that tells you what kind of people they really are. That's it for this edition of the podcast. As always, thanks for being with us. You can catch us on Substack, Spotify, Apple, and of course on YouTube and on Blue Sky and so many other different platforms right now. Great to get the feedback that we've had on this. This is such an important time in our history, and it's so important for us to be informed and to understand exactly what's going on, who the players are, and to what extent that they want to be involved and how they're trying to influence how we're going to vote come April 28th here in this country. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wissenz Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wissenz Law, 905-522-1102 or wissenslaw.com.